The hallways of the library were cloaked in darkness, except for a faint, flickering light in the distance. Laura ran, her heart pounding as she tried to focus on the symbols sketched on the piece of paper in her hand. The sound of alarms echoed off the walls, her hurried footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She knew time was running out, and every second felt like it was pulling her deeper into chaos. The paper in her hands was the only clue left. A sequence of scrambled letters, an anagram left behind like a taunt. Worse yet, someone was chasing her. The heavy footsteps behind her grew louder with each passing moment. She glanced at her watch. Only minutes remained before security locked down the entire building. Then, no one would get in or out. She stopped, her lungs burning, and spun around sharply, but no one was visible. Only the echo of those footsteps. She knew she was being watched, but time was against her. Laura took a deep breath, gripping the paper as if that piece of the puzzle could save her life. The blaring alarms were a cruel reminder that something far bigger was at stake. Hours earlier, everything had been under control. The day had started like any other at the Boston Grand Library. The most anticipated event of the year was approaching, the unveiling of the recently discovered Tenebrous manuscript, a medieval document lost for centuries. Laura, a renowned cryptographer and expert in ancient manuscripts, had been called in to ensure the document's security. Her job was to verify the protection system and ensure everything was flawless before the unveiling. Everything seemed perfectly safe until, just minutes before the official presentation, the manuscript vanished. No signs of forced entry, no security system failures. Just a perplexing absence. In the place where the manuscript should have been, a sheet of paper with scrambled letters was left behind. An anagram, Laura thought immediately. The world around her seemed to freeze as she read and reread the cryptic message. It wasn't just a simple word puzzle. It was a provocation. And somehow, a clue. The authorities were called in quickly, but Laura knew something was deeply wrong. While security guards and police officers scoured the place for clues, she dove into the library's archives, searching for any connection between the manuscript and the enigma she had found. There was something there, something hidden in the shadows of history. Her intuition told her that the disappearance was far from an ordinary theft. But who could be behind it? As she deciphered parts of the anagram, Laura realized that the hidden words weren't just a clue to the manuscript's whereabouts but pointed to something far bigger, something she couldn't yet fully understand. The pressure was mounting. Every second, the mystery thickened. Security guards spoke of an incident in the West Wing, and the police began to suspect internal sabotage. But Laura knew they were on the wrong track. With the paper in hand, she rushed to the archives where documents related to Tenebrous were stored. The darkness in the hallways made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She knew she wasn't alone. Every step echoed back at her, every shadow seemed to shift as she advanced. Her entire body was on alert, her trained instincts screaming that danger was near. When she arrived at the archive room, the feeling of urgency intensified. It was up to her to figure out the truth. Something was terribly wrong with the situation, something that defied all logic. Whoever had stolen the manuscript wasn't just after its historical value. The theft was tied to something much deeper and more sinister. And at that moment, Laura knew she had to keep going, even without knowing where the enigma would lead. She opened the heavy door to the archive room, the creak of the metal echoing in the emptiness around her. Inside, the ancient documents sat on their pristine shelves, as always. But the silence in the room was almost deafening. Laura placed the paper on the reading table and studied the symbols again. Her sweaty hands flipped through some of the old documents related to the manuscript, searching for anything that might make sense. But every new page she touched seemed to push her further away from the answer. The lights began to flicker. Her eyes widened when she finally found a small clue in the margin of one of the old manuscripts. A symbol that matched one of the characters in the enigma. This can't be a coincidence, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. But what did it mean? In the next moment, the lights went out completely, and the room plunged into total darkness. Laura heard the sound of footsteps again, this time much closer. She knew she wasn't alone. The darkness was suffocating, all-encompassing, and the air seemed to have suddenly grown thicker. Laura stood perfectly still, listening as the footsteps drew nearer. Her body was tense, adrenaline surging through her veins as her mind raced to process what was happening. She was trapped in the archive room, surrounded by ancient documents, but all she could think about was the piece of paper in her hand. Whoever was approaching was after the same thing she was, the tenebrous manuscript. She waited, the footsteps finally stopping. A chilling silence filled the room. Were they lurking, waiting for her to make a move? Cold sweat dripped down her neck, but she knew she had to act quickly. Instinctively, she slid behind one of the large bookshelves that dominated the room, using the darkness as her ally. Her eyes strained to adjust to the dim light, her heart beating so erratically she feared it might give her away. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps started to fade. The immediate tension eased slightly, giving Laura a moment to think. The sequence of letters in the anagram kept spinning in her mind. Something was off, something that didn't yet make sense. She needed to figure out what those words meant before it was too late. She knew she couldn't trust anyone right now. This was far more than just the theft of a valuable manuscript, and her own safety was now on the line. Once certain that the room was safe, Laura left the archive and headed straight for the office of the head historian, David Mackenzie, who was responsible for overseeing the manuscript's exhibition. There had always been something about him that intrigued her. Maybe it was the evasive way he talked about the tenebrous manuscript, or the fact that he avoided answering some of her more direct questions about its origins. Throughout their previous conversations, David always seemed to be holding something back. Now, more than ever, Laura needed to know what he was hiding. When she entered his office, she found only the soft glow of a desk lamp, illuminating a clutter of papers scattered across David's desk. He wasn't there, but Laura knew she didn't have much time before he returned. Quickly sorting through the piles of documents, she noticed something strange, the complete lack of any mention of the manuscript itself. All the documents relating to the exhibition were there, except for the details about the tenebrous manuscript. It was as if someone had deliberately removed all information about the document before she could access it. As she continued to search through the papers, one peculiar detail caught her eye. Among the documents was a printed copy of an email sent by David. It mentioned a historical society with which he had been collaborating for the exhibition. This seemed odd. He had never mentioned this society before. Could this be the key to understanding what was happening? Laura discreetly folded the email and slipped it into her pocket before leaving the office, knowing it could be the clue she needed. As she walked back toward the security room, where the guards were reviewing the camera footage, Laura's mind kept returning to the anagram and the mysterious society. The more she thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces started to align. She wasn't dealing with a simple theft of a valuable item. The manuscript seemed to hold secrets that certain people were willing to go to great lengths to conceal. When she arrived at the security room, she was told that they still hadn't found anything significant on the footage. All the camera angles appeared normal, as if the manuscript had simply vanished into thin air. But Laura knew that wasn't possible. Something was hidden there, something no one else had noticed. She returned to her desk, staring at the anagram once more. The letters started to form a pattern in her mind. It wasn't just a clue about where the manuscript had gone. It seemed to be a code, something leading her to an even bigger revelation. Laura scribbled down some words in her notebook, trying to rearrange the letters. That's when she noticed one of the hidden words was societas. Society. This couldn't be a coincidence. Suddenly, everything began to connect. The secret society mentioned in David's email, the mysterious disappearance of the manuscript, and the anagram that seemed to point to something much bigger than she had ever imagined. Laura began to feel like she was being pulled into something far deeper, something that went beyond her immediate understanding. But there were still more questions than answers. Who was behind the theft? And what was the society really after? As these thoughts spun in her head, the sense of urgency returned. She knew she had to confront David about the email and his ties to the secretive society. But she also knew she had to be careful. Someone inside the library was involved, and time was running out for her to act. Heart racing, Laura stood from her chair and prepared for her next move. She was about to step into a game of power and secrets that could cost her far more than just solving a mystery. The eerie silence that filled the library after the manuscript's disappearance was deafening. The weight of the mystery lingered in the air, like a dense shadow no one could shake. Laura descended the long, dim corridors toward the basement, where the oldest documents were stored, many of which were rarely touched by outside researchers. If she was going to confront David Mackenzie, she needed more than just a vague email. She needed something concrete, something that would force him to reveal what he was hiding. As she walked, the name Societas kept circling in her mind. It was Latin, typically associated with closed groups, societies bound by shared secrets or goals. The email mentioned a collaboration with this society, but there were no details about who they were or what they wanted with the tenebrous manuscript. Reaching the basement, Laura accessed the archives, where some of the oldest and least accessed manuscripts were stored. There were records dating back centuries, many still shrouded in mystery. Laura moved through the dust-covered shelves until she found a catalog of documents from the period when the missing manuscript was written. Carefully flipping through the catalog, she found references to a secret order that believed in alchemy, the transformation of metals into gold, and according to some legends, mystical powers. The pieces were starting to come together, and Laura felt she was getting closer to uncovering the truth behind the disappearance. As she pulled a document from the shelf, a loose piece of paper fell to the ground. Bending down to pick it up, Laura noticed it was a newspaper clipping, decades old, detailing the theft of another medieval manuscript under strikingly similar circumstances. That manuscript had also vanished without a trace, and the case had never been solved. The coincidences were unsettling. Laura tucked the clipping into her bag and knew it was time to confront David. As she made her way back through the corridors of the library, Laura mentally reviewed everything she knew so far. The unexplained disappearance, the secret society, the connection to ancient mysteries of alchemy, and now, the newspaper clippings suggesting this was not an isolated incident. It all pointed to one conclusion: someone had been trying to obtain these manuscripts for a long time, and Laura had unknowingly placed herself at the heart of a much larger conspiracy. When she reached David's office, she found him sitting at his desk, pale and sweaty. He looked at her with suspicion but said nothing. Laura entered and shut the door behind her. The silence between them was heavy. Laura pulled the email from her pocket and placed it on David's desk without saying a word. He glanced at the paper, then back at her, his eyes narrowing. "Societas?" Laura said, crossing her arms. "That's what you didn't mention when you called me to investigate the disappearance." "Who are they, David?" David hesitated, his fingers nervously tapping on the desk. He knew Laura wouldn't leave without answers. After a long sigh, he stood and walked to the window, staring out as if deciding whether to speak or not. "You wouldn't understand, Laura. This isn't just a regular historical society. We're talking about something far more profound. They believe the manuscript that disappeared holds secrets that could change everything we know about the history of science. The problem is, they're not just historians in search of knowledge. They're fanatics. David's words hit Laura like a blow. Everything she had suspected now felt terrifyingly real. And you're involved in this? Did you help them steal the manuscript? David turned to her, his eyes wide. No. I was just contacted by them. They knew I was overseeing the manuscript's exhibition and wanted information. At first, I thought it was just a simple academic inquiry, but things started getting strange when they asked me to hide certain details about the exhibition. A chill ran down Laura's spine. There was much more to this story, and she needed to figure out who was really behind it all. What else do you know about them? David hesitated for a moment before pulling a small notebook from his drawer. He opened it and slid it across the desk toward Laura. This is all I've managed to gather about them. Everything I know is in there, but it's not much. The truth is, they operate in the shadows, and they're not easy to track down. Laura took the notebook and quickly flipped through it. The information inside was vague, but it referenced a series of mysterious disappearances of ancient manuscripts over the years. Everything pointed to this society hunting down old secrets related to alchemy and possibly the power to turn metals into gold. But it didn't make sense. Why, in the 21st century, would anyone still care about alchemy? Leaving David's office, Laura knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. This society wasn't just a group of curious scholars. They were willing to do anything to get what they wanted, and the missing manuscript was the key. Now, Laura had more questions than answers, but she was getting closer to something big. What she didn't yet know was just how far these people were willing to go to protect their secrets. As she walked back to her office, a sense of unease settled over her. She knew she was being watched, that every step she took was being monitored. The weight of the conspiracy she had uncovered seemed to suffocate her. And now, with David's notebook in hand, she had the first concrete piece that directly linked her to the secret society. The question she couldn't shake was, what did the tenebrous manuscript really hold? The sound of her footsteps echoed down the empty corridors as Laura hurried toward the west section of the library. Every move now felt calculated, as if she was constantly on edge, anticipating something or someone to appear out of nowhere. David's revelation about the secret society wouldn't leave her mind. A hidden organization willing to do anything to recover ancient secrets. She felt she was getting closer to uncovering the truth about the tenebrous manuscript, but at the same time, an impending sense of danger loomed over her. Clutching David's notebook tightly, Laura knew the next clue was within its pages, scribbled hastily as if David himself had been afraid to document everything clearly. The anagram continued to spin in her head like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together. The society, the anagram, the manuscript's disappearance, everything pointed to something larger, but she couldn't yet see the full picture. She arrived at the West Wing and began searching for anything that could connect this area to the missing manuscript. The West Wing of the library housed rare manuscripts, many of which had been found in terrible condition and restored over the years. Laura knew the place like the back of her hand, but now, everything seemed cloaked in mystery, as though something was hiding in plain sight. Flipping through David's notebook once again, she noticed a note that referenced a specific location within the West Wing, a particular shelf of manuscripts that seemed otherwise unremarkable. Curious, she made her way over. Among the old texts, Laura found a book that looked ordinary, but something about the way it was placed felt off. When she pulled the volume from the shelf, a soft click echoed, as though she had triggered some kind of mechanism. The bookshelf shifted slightly, revealing a small, old wooden door behind it. Laura cautiously approached, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. She had never heard of any secret passageways in the library. Was she on the right track, or was this just another trap? Hesitantly, she pushed open the door, which creaked loudly, revealing a hidden room behind the shelf. The air inside was heavier, as if no one had set foot in the room for years. The room, dimly lit by the faint light filtering through the cracks in the door, was filled with documents, old letters, and papers scattered across a wooden table. But at the center of it all, something immediately caught Laura's attention: an ancient metal safe with symbols engraved on its lock, the same symbols from the anagram she had been decoding. Her heart raced. The safe seemed to be the key to unlocking the mystery of the manuscript. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the engraved symbols. Suddenly, a noise behind her made her spin around. Someone was there. A man, dressed in a library security uniform, silently entered the room. Laura recognized the face: Brad, one of the guards who had been present during the initial investigations. He closed the door behind him and stood still for a moment, watching her with a look that was both curious and unsettlingly calm. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low but carrying a dangerous weight. Laura's body tensed. "I could say the same about you, Brad. What are you doing here?" Brad took a step forward, his eyes shifting to the safe. "I should stop you right now, you know? But oddly enough, you've gotten further than anyone else. I was starting to wonder if anyone would be able to figure this out." Laura held her ground, though fear was creeping up inside her. "You're a part of this, aren't you? The secret society. You've been involved from the beginning, helping them steal the manuscript." A cold smile spread across Brad's face. "I'm part of something much bigger, Laura. And you're about to understand what's really at stake here. But what you haven't realized yet is that the whole time, you've just been playing their game. From the moment you picked up that anagram, they knew you were the one to solve it. You're not uncovering the mystery, you're doing their work." Brad's words echoed in Laura's mind. She had been manipulated from the start. Every clue she had found, every puzzle she had solved, hadn't brought her closer to solving the manuscript's disappearance. They had guided her exactly where they wanted. Her heart pounded, but Laura's mind was racing. There was more to this than Brad was letting on. "If they already know everything, why let me get this far?" Laura asked, trying to buy time. "Because you haven't cracked the final part," Brad replied, crossing his arms. "The missing manuscript is only half of what we're after. The other half is here, in the safe. But it takes a skilled cryptographer to open it. Someone like you." Laura realized just how cornered she was. Brad and the secret society had always been a step ahead. But on the other hand, they needed her. "And what happens after I open this?" she asked, nodding toward the safe. "You're going to kill me?" Brad shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Maybe. Or maybe we'll let you live, as long as you disappear and never speak about this again. Depends on how cooperative you are." Laura's mind raced with options. She had to get out of there, but she also knew this was her only chance to solve the mystery. There was a slim chance she could turn the tables. Everything depended on what was inside that safe. If she could open it and sabotage their plan at the same time, maybe she could buy herself some time. Her eyes fixed on the engraved symbols, Laura began to work. Her mind raced as she calculated Brad's movements, the time she would have to act, and how she could turn the situation to her advantage. Slowly, the ancient and complex mechanism of the safe started to open. The metallic sound of the safe unlocking echoed through the room, intensifying the tension between Laura and Brad. She knew she was on the verge of discovering the secret the society was after, but she also knew that each movement could be her last. The air felt thicker as she carefully opened the safe, trying not to let her nerves show. Inside the safe, among old papers and golden seals, was an object she immediately recognized: a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same symbols that adorned the missing manuscript. Laura reached for it cautiously, but before she could touch it, Brad stepped forward, his eyes locked on the box. "Not so fast, Laura," he said with a cold grin. "That's the key to everything, but only you can open it. Only someone with your expertise would know how this works." Laura stared at the box in her hands. She knew she was one step away from unraveling the mystery completely, but she also knew that meant falling deeper into the society's hands. Every move was being watched. Brad wasn't going to let her walk away easily. She needed to think quickly. She needed a plan. Time was running out. "If I open this," Laura began, her voice steady, "what happens to me? You and your society think you can just discard me once I solve this puzzle for you?" Brad let out a short, humorless laugh. "You have a choice, Laura. You can cooperate, open the box, and then disappear like nothing ever happened. Or you can keep resisting, and, well, let's just say it won't end well for you." The wooden box felt heavier now, almost as if the weight of the decision itself was pressing down on her. Laura sensed Brad's gaze burning into her back as she examined the symbols on the lid. There was a sequence that seemed familiar, something she recalled from the ancient alchemy documents she had studied. But something felt wrong, something Brad didn't know. As she pretended to analyze the box, Laura's mind was working on a plan. If she could manipulate the contents of the box, she might gain enough time to escape or even turn the situation in her favor. There were no guarantees, but it was the only chance she had. With her mind made up, Laura began to twist the symbolic rings carved into the lid of the box, turning them carefully. The lid finally gave way with a faint click, opening slowly. Inside the box was a small scroll, tied with an ancient seal. Laura's heart raced as she realized this could contain the secret the society had been searching for. But before she could examine it, Brad lunged forward, snatching the scroll from her hands. "You've done your part," he said with a victorious grin. "Now, the rest is up to me." Laura watched as Brad unrolled the scroll, his eyes hungrily scanning the ancient words written on it. But then, something unexpected happened. Brad's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion. He looked up at Laura, anger flashing in his eyes. "What is this?" he shouted. "This isn't the instructions we need." Laura remained calm even as her heart raced. Her plan had worked. While Brad was distracted, she had altered the sequence of symbols on the box, distorting the message on the scroll and sabotaging what the society needed. It wasn't the formula they were searching for, it was a decoy, something that would lead them nowhere. "Maybe you underestimated the complexity of this puzzle, Brad," Laura said, keeping her voice level. "Or maybe you picked the wrong person to trust." Brad's frustration grew. He knew he had been tricked, but there was nothing he could do about it now. Before he could react, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. Other members of the society were closing in. Laura's time was running out, and she knew if she didn't act quickly, escape would be impossible. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Laura made a quick move. She threw the empty box toward Brad, using the distraction to bolt toward the door. Brad tried to grab her, but he wasn't fast enough. Laura darted out of the room, sprinting down the corridors as fast as her legs could carry her, because her life depended on it. Behind her, the sound of Brad and the society members' footsteps grew louder. The library, once a familiar and safe place, had transformed into a labyrinth of danger. She knew she needed a plan, an escape route that would take her out of the library before she was caught. But with every turn she made, the feeling of being trapped grew stronger. The society seemed to be everywhere. It was as though the library was their territory, and she was caught in the web they had spent years constructing. Finally, Laura spotted a staircase leading up to the higher floors. Without thinking twice, she raced up, ignoring the burning sensation in her legs. Each step felt like an eternity, and the sound of footsteps behind her only intensified the pressure. When she reached the top, she ducked into a narrow hallway that led to an old conference room rarely used by the library staff. She hid behind a stack of old archive boxes, trying to steady her breathing. Brad and the society members soon reached the upper floor. Laura knew she didn't have much time. Her eyes scanned the room desperately, looking for an escape route. There were no windows, and the only door was now being guarded by her enemies. She was cornered. For a few seconds, the silence was suffocating, but then a dangerous idea crossed her mind. The archive boxes she was hiding behind contained important documents, some of which were closely tied to what the society was searching for. If she could destroy those documents, she might be able to eliminate all the clues they needed. It was a risky move, but it was her only chance. Laura noticed the old heating lamps connected to the wall, once used to preserve the most fragile documents. Grabbing one of the lamps, she silently approached the boxes, preparing to carry out the desperate act that might seal her fate. The heat from the old lamp intensified as Laura held it over the fragile documents. There was no turning back now. If she burned these papers, she might ruin the society's only chance to recover the secrets they so desperately sought. But she knew it was the only way to stop them from moving forward. The flame began to flicker at the edges of the ancient pages, the smell of burning paper filling the small room. Suddenly, the door burst open with a loud crash, and Brad stormed in, followed by two other men. Their eyes widened as they saw the flames spreading across the boxes of documents. "What the hell have you done?" Brad yelled, panic creeping into his voice. Laura didn't wait. As they rushed toward the fire, trying to extinguish the growing flames, she took the moment of distraction to dash toward the exit. The fire was already spreading too quickly. The heat from the burning documents forced Brad and the others to back off momentarily, and Laura sprinted into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The smoke from the fire was rising, clouding the corridors. Her lungs burned with every breath, but she didn't stop. Behind her, Brad was shouting orders, and the sounds of heavy footsteps echoed closer and closer. The fire had bought her precious seconds, but it wouldn't hold them back for long. As Laura tore down the long hallway, she spotted a side door that led to an old maintenance stairwell. She didn't hesitate. Pushing open the heavy door, she dashed down the metal stairs two at a time, the clanging of her footsteps echoing in the tight space. She knew she didn't have much time before the fire alarms went off, triggering an evacuation. She could feel the smoke creeping down the stairwell, making the air harder to breathe with every passing second. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in the basement of the library, a dark, claustrophobic space filled with old library equipment and forgotten files. The only light came from a dim emergency lamp flickering at the far end of the corridor. Laura advanced cautiously, trying to stay as quiet as possible, listening for any sounds of pursuit. The footsteps behind her had momentarily faded. Maybe they had lost her, or maybe the fire was forcing them to slow down. But she couldn't be sure. As she crept down the narrow corridor, the cold concrete walls closing in on her, she reached a heavy metal door at the far end. She tried the handle, but it was locked. Panic surged through her. There was no way out. Frantically, she searched around, looking for anything that might help her escape. Her hands shook as she rattled the door again, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Behind her, the echo of footsteps returned. Brad and his men were closing in. Laura's heart raced, her mind working at full speed, trying to find a way out. There were no windows, no hidden exits. The basement was a dead end, and she had nowhere to hide. Brad's figure appeared at the end of the hallway, his shadow stretching long in the flickering light. "You're not getting out of here, Laura," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The society is way ahead of you. That fire you started, it won't change anything. We'll find what we're looking for, and you won't live to see it. Laura backed against the cold metal door, the chill seeping into her skin. You'll never get the manuscript. I destroyed the only clues you had, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Brad's cold smile returned. You think you're in control, but you never were. You've been useful, but now you're disposable. He stepped forward, and Laura knew she was out of options. The distant roar of the fire still echoed through the library, and the smoke was starting to seep into the basement. She was running out of time, and she could feel it in every fiber of her body. But then, something unexpected happened. A loud, metallic sound reverberated through the space, the sound of a door opening. On the other side of the corridor, the emergency exit to the basement had been thrown open, and a group of security guards rushed into the hallway. Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her. The smoke had triggered the alarms, and now, help had finally arrived. Brad took a step back, his expression shifting from smugness to panic for the first time. This isn't over, he growled, before turning and slipping back into the shadows, disappearing before the guards could reach him. Laura collapsed against the wall, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been fighting for hours. The guards quickly surrounded her, but the sounds of the fire and the chaos above felt distant as her vision began to blur. They were talking to her, asking if she was okay, but the weight of everything that had happened made it hard for her to process. Her body was safe, but her mind was still racing. They escorted her out of the building as smoke continued to pour from the upper levels of the library. Outside, the scene was chaos. Fire trucks were parked at every angle, and firefighters were working to contain the blaze. Employees and visitors who had been evacuated watched from a distance as the fire consumed part of the library. Laura was led to an ambulance, where a paramedic wrapped her in a blanket, but she barely felt the warmth. Her mind was still on the manuscript, still on Brad's final words. She had won a battle, but she knew it wasn't over. The manuscript was still out there, and the society would never stop searching for it. She had managed to delay them, maybe even destroy some of the clues, but the war for the tenebrous manuscript was far from finished. As she sat in the back of the ambulance, watching the smoke rise into the night sky, Laura felt a strange mix of triumph and dread. The manuscript held secrets she had only begun to uncover, and now she knew the society would stop at nothing to retrieve it. The fire may have slowed them down, but Brad's escape meant they were still out there, watching, waiting for their next move. Her body ached with exhaustion, but she couldn't rest yet. She had to figure out what the manuscript really contained. What was the society willing to kill for? And what was she willing to risk to keep it hidden? With the chaos of the burning library behind her, Laura made a silent vow. She wouldn't stop until she found the manuscript again and uncovered the truth, no matter what it took. The sun was beginning to set when Laura finally stepped out of the library, wrapped in an emergency blanket provided by the paramedics. Smoke still rose slowly from the building behind her, and the sounds of fire engines and alarms echoed across the plaza. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Everything that had happened still spun in her head, the confrontation with Brad, the fire that had destroyed the documents, and, most pressing of all, the lingering question, where was the tenebrous manuscript? As she watched the firefighters battle the lingering flames, an idea began to form in her mind. She had managed to throw off the secret society's plans temporarily, but she knew they weren't finished. Brad had escaped, and she was sure his associates were still out there, regrouping. The threat wasn't gone, it had only retreated. Laura felt the pressure of time weighing on her again, and the tenebrous manuscript remained the central piece of it all. The police had asked her a few quick questions, but Laura knew she couldn't tell them everything. If she started talking about secret societies, anagrams, and ancient mysteries hidden in manuscripts, she'd sound crazy. Instead, she gave them a simplified version of the events. The fire had started by accident while she was working in the archive room, and the guards had arrived in time to stop things from getting worse. She knew she would have to tread carefully from now on. Brad and his people would try to find her again. Sitting on a nearby bench, trying to piece her thoughts together, Laura pulled out the notebook she had taken from David's office. She flipped through the pages absent-mindedly, scanning for anything she might have missed. The truth was, even with the fire, there were still so many unanswered questions. The secret society wasn't going to give up on finding the manuscript, and neither could she. That's when her eyes landed on something that made her stop. A small, hastily scribbled note in the margin of one of David's pages. Last clue, check the symbol in the footer. Laura frowned. This hadn't been in the documents she'd already reviewed. She reached for her own notebook, where she had scribbled the letters from the anagram. The letters were scrambled, but the pattern now made sense. The symbol in the footer wasn't referencing any of the destroyed archives. It was talking about something in the manuscript itself. Laura's heart began to race. Everything pointed to the real secret of the tenebrous manuscript being hidden somewhere no one had thought to look. Perhaps the manuscript contained more than just medieval alchemical texts. She remembered the descriptions she had read, fragile pages, covered in symbols that no scholar had fully deciphered. The manuscript had been known for its texts on alchemy, but what else could be hidden there? She knew what she had to do. She had to find the manuscript before the secret society did. If the symbol in the footer was the key to the mystery, that would be her next step. And more importantly, she had to figure out what Brad and his accomplices were really after. Something told her that the manuscript's secret went far beyond alchemy. Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Laura tucked the notebook back into her bag. She was tired, wounded, and the trauma from the night's events weighed heavily on her mind, but she couldn't stop now. The secret society was out there, and time was running against her. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Laura felt like she had an advantage. Now, she knew what to look for. She rose from the bench and glanced one last time at the library. The lights from the fire trucks and ambulances still flashed around the building, but in the distance, the smoke was starting to thin. Laura pulled her coat tighter around herself, preparing for the next storm. She knew she wasn't alone in this fight anymore. She couldn't trust the authorities or anyone outside. This was something she would have to handle alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the evening settled in, Laura began walking away from the plaza. The mystery was far from solved, and she knew the confrontation with the secret society was only just beginning. But this time, she was ready. The tenebrous manuscript was no longer just a piece of history, it was the key to exposing the truth. And Laura was willing to go to the end to uncover its secrets. Days had passed since the fire at the library, but the weight of those events still clung to Laura. The images of flames consuming the documents, Brad's cold, determined face, and the relentless blare of alarms echoed in her mind. Even though she had escaped with her life and temporarily halted the society's plans, she knew it wasn't over. There was a gnawing feeling deep inside her that at any moment, they could resurface. At her small desk, in the corner of her living room, Laura had spread out all the papers and notes she had managed to salvage, including David's notebook. The words "check the symbol" in the footer played over and over in her mind. She had spent sleepless nights reviewing everything, trying to find more information about the tenebrous manuscript, anything that might confirm her theory about the hidden symbol. But so far, her research had led to nothing but dead ends. Then, early one cold, overcast morning, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at her door, with no return address. The envelope was beige, slightly crumpled, but her name was written on it in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Her heart raced as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper, with a single riddle written on it. That which you seek lies hidden in shadow. What the eyes see is not the truth revealed. Return to where it all began. The secret awaits the one who knows more. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. The style of the riddle, the cryptic phrasing, it all pointed to the society. They were still watching her. They hadn't finished with her. But the riddle felt like something else too, a clue. It almost seemed like an invitation to continue the chase for the manuscript. Was this a trap? Or was it another piece of the puzzle she was being led to solve? The line "return to where it all began" made Laura think immediately of the library. That was where the manuscript had disappeared, where she had first encountered the clues that led her down this dangerous path. But something else nagged at her. The riddle seemed to suggest the answer was hidden in plain sight, something she had overlooked before. And then it hit her, the symbol in the footer mentioned by David. Maybe the answer wasn't in something new, it was in something she had already seen, in the manuscript itself. Her pulse quickened. It was possible that the tenebrous manuscript contained a secret hidden in its pages that no one had ever discovered. The alchemical writings were the focus, but what if there was more? Something deeper, something that would explain why the society was willing to kill for it. She remembered the descriptions of the manuscript, ancient, fragile pages marked with mysterious symbols. The scholars had struggled to decode them, but now, Laura was convinced that the symbol David had referenced was the key. Without wasting any time, Laura made up her mind. She needed to return to the library. Even though parts of it were still closed due to the fire, she had to find a way inside and uncover the truth. She contacted old friends who worked there, using her connections to gain access to a small research room where they had stored what remained of the undamaged documents. When Laura arrived at the library, the atmosphere was tense. Smoke still lingered in some areas, and much of the building was off-limits. But with careful planning, she managed to slip into the restricted section where the manuscript would have been kept. The shelves were still full of salvaged books and manuscripts, but Laura wasn't interested in them. She had one goal: find any trace of the tenebrous manuscript or its secrets. As she scoured the shelves, her eyes landed on something that made her heart skip a beat. One of the documents, thought to be lost in the fire, was still intact, stored on a high shelf away from the flames. It looked just like the descriptions of the tenebrous manuscript, bound in worn leather, its pages filled with intricate symbols. Her hands shook as she reached for it. She opened the manuscript and carefully examined the bottom of each page. And then, on the final page, there it was, a small, almost imperceptible symbol engraved into the parchment. It was a circle with intertwining lines forming a complex pattern. She had never noticed it before, but now it made perfect sense. This symbol was the key. Laura touched the symbol gently, feeling the indentations on the surface. Something was hidden here, possibly a mechanism or a coded message. Pressing on the symbol, she felt the page loosen slightly, revealing a hidden compartment between the layers of parchment. Inside was a piece of paper, even older than the manuscript itself. It was a coded message, but Laura didn't need long to understand it. The manuscript wasn't just an alchemical text, it was a map. A map that led to something far older and far more powerful than anyone had imagined. The stories about turning metal into gold were a distraction. The real secret lay elsewhere, and Laura had just found the first piece of it. Her heart raced as she carefully tucked the paper into her bag. She needed to leave quickly, but before she could make it to the door, she felt a presence behind her. Slowly turning, she saw Brad standing there, a grim smile on his face. "I told you, Laura," he whispered. "This isn't over." In that moment, Laura knew that the power struggle and the mystery were only just beginning. The eternal enigma of the tenebrous manuscript would lead her to even greater dangers, and the truth, once fully revealed, would be far more perilous than she had ever imagined.